Welcome to the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, empowering your real estate investing with techniques, opportunities, and information, minus the BS and sales pitches. Now, please welcome the host of the Investor Empowerment Series, Joe Mueller, from the Tough as Nails Investment Syndicate, Joe Mueller.
All right, this is the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, episode number 64, with broker extraordinaire Doug Kowalewski. Thanks again, Doug, for your second appearance on the Investor Empowerment Series radio show. Today, Doug suggested that we get together and have a chat, and I said, you know what, let's make it a podcast about lease options and lease purchases. Doug, thank you again for being on the show.
Always glad to be here, and I'm kind of excited about this subject.
You're kind of excited?
Mm-hmm.
Not very excited?
Oh,
You're
no,
kind of excited?
I'm very excited because...
All right. I like that better.
You did that overview of financing options, I think, two podcasts ago on real estate, no matter what level you're at, even if you're at the no money and bad credit point, how you can acquire property. And lease options are something I think that should be considered for people that are trying to get real estate and really don't have the ability to do it any other way. But for established investors, it's kind of an interesting way to procure tenants.
Absolutely.
And potentially sell property. We could get into that. Sometimes you sell them, sometimes you don't.
Right. No, I definitely want to get into that. But before we do, I just want to say that Doug's referring to episode number 60 of the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, titled Financing Options for Real Estate Investors, where we briefly touch on how a lease option could be a way that an investor can acquire and control, I should say not acquire, but control a property and become a landlord with very little money involved on their own parts.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, why don't we get started on what your thoughts are on lease options? I mean, you touched on a couple different topics already, so it's your show, Doug.
Okay. There's a lot of things to think about when you hear the term lease option or lease purchase.
Well, yeah, let's go over to what is it first. What is it?
Yes. It is, if you are a renter, you are acquiring an option to buy a house by a particular time at a set price. And that is an option, and that word means it's optional if you ever decide to exercise that option. And I just want to make sure that people understand the difference between a lease purchase, because a lease purchase is just like an extended closing. You know, like you do a contract to buy a house today and you're going to close it in 3 years. A lease purchase is a commitment to buy it, and if you're a landlord, a commitment to sell it.
Right.
But if you are using a lease option and you're a tenant, then it just gives you the right to purchase it any time within the period up to the end of where the option expires. This is actually no different than people that buy options for commodities or stocks or anything else like that.
Right. So the definition of an option, just like in the stock market, would be you've got the option to make a purchase of whatever that, well, I'm going to use the word asset, but whatever that is, at a previously determined price.
That's right.
And if the market, and specific to real estate, if the market goes up or down, just like a stock market, that price is already locked in at what you've, quote unquote, committed for. And in order to obtain that commitment, which is actually called the option itself, you have to pay for it. You have to buy that.
Yes.
So, correct me if I'm wrong here. And for the listening audience, I have zero experience with lease options, which is one of the reasons why Doug's here on the show today to help educate all of us. My understanding is, you know, you would sell that option to a potential tenant for a price like $5,000 perhaps, or something along. It could be variable, right? Depending
Any
on
number
the
of
property.
ways. It could be an upfront cash, that they give to you, or monthly
Towards
addition
an option?
to the rent. Yes, you'd say that the option is going to cost you, $5,000, and we're going to get that $5,000 by adding $250 a month to your rent.
Okay, so in a lease option situation, they have the option to buy. They're not required to, but at the end of that lease or that term that they've set with that landlord, let's just use the way. Well, we're going to say 3 years, but you had said 1 to 3 years, and I think that we both agreed that in the court system, if it extends into year 4 or year 5, and you've set a lease with an option to purchase into year 4 or 5, that it starts to look more like a mortgage and a seller finance type sale. Therefore, if there is a problem with that tenant, you're going to be looking at a foreclosure situation as opposed to an eviction situation. Is that?
Yeah,
Okay.
and I do want to go back.
We'll go back.
The option price can be zero.
Right. Well, it has to be like $1, right?
Oh yeah,
At least $1.
Right. But
I don't know.
it doesn't have, all of these things are structured for the specific property that you're, trying to move it forward. So you're trying to either enhance the cash flow or actually sell it probably at a better than market
Right.
price.
And we talked about that too, because the option sets that price. It sets a future price at the current date, and we really don't know what the market's going to bear.
That's correct. But what we do know from our investor empowerment meetings is that there are a lot of people that come to our meetings, and they've been coming to the meetings for years and years and years, still trying to acquire their first piece of real estate.
Sure.
And somehow nothing has worked out for them. So getting at least, ownership of the place they live, lease option is a very good way to go.
Right.
Simply because if you find a property that's for rent, and you talk to that landlord, and you tell them that what you're trying to do is eventually buy the house, he may work out something with you that allows you to live in the property, pay rent as you're doing somewhere else now, and give him some good reason to sell you that house within usually a 1 to 3 year period.
Okay.
But again, I want to emphasize with the option, rent with option, if you're to protect yourself as the tenant, you should be able to exercise that option anytime you want within that time frame.
Okay.
You don't have to, if it's a 3 year option, you don't have to wait till 3 years to get it done. Is if all of a sudden, unfortunately your grandmother passed away and left you some money.
Right.
And you could just, call them up after you've lived there for 1 month and say, I'd like to buy the house at the price we agreed on.
Because you've purchased that option to do so.
Right.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
all these people that we have coming to our meetings that are also going to other people's meetings and paying for classes and everything else like that, and still come here and after years don't even own the house that where they live. Please consider this.
Right.
Now, if you are an owner of a property and you're looking for a way to sell it, and maybe it's not the most marketable property where, if you put it in the MLS, people be lining up to, give you offers all over the place. If there's some reason the property's a little distressed or something like that, if you market that house as rent to own, lease option, purchase option, or something like that, your phone will start ringing off the hook.
Yes.
And because many of the people, not all, but we can talk about a scenario where there's some people with money that might even want to enter into a lease option. But people that are this is their only way into acquiring a real estate asset. So that gives the seller some leverage, and you can get higher rents, oftentimes accumulating a little portion of that rent to help them with closing costs and things like that when they finally qualify to buy it. And probably a better sales price on the house. Now, if the option is a 1-year option, it's pretty easy to probably project the price value of the house out 1 year. After you get into 2 or 3 years, then you're going to have to establish a price that you think where the market's going to be. So it could end up being a super deal for the renter, 3 years from now because you underestimated the market.
Right.
But or it could end up being not so good a deal for the tenant, and then they don't have to exercise the option.
Right. And based on what we've discussed, though the best interest for everyone involved would be for them to actually potentially exercise that option and close on that property with whatever type of financing they can obtain. A lot of the times they don't.
That's correct.
And why don't you tell people why? So here, let's take a step back. I do want to cover a couple other things that you brought up, but just because we're on that particular topic, over a 3-year period, a lot can happen. So you rent to a tenant for, let's just use arbitrary numbers, but $1,000 a month, and you've collected an option fee and executed a separate option agreement for, let's say, $5,000, and you want to give a little bit of credit that's paid to you monthly through the rent back to the tenant that they can utilize at that closing for either going towards their down payment, closing costs, whatever. It's going to be a credit on the actual settlement statement when you close, is the way I understand it, because I've never done this. But so if you've got $5,000 down, that's a $5,000 down payment that the lender can utilize in whatever program they have, and then you've, let's say, given them $100 a month over the course of 3 years, so now it's $3,600. So in theory, they've got $8,600 in, quote unquote, down payment or credit towards the purchase. Is that accurate?
It's accurate to an extent. The only thing is it depends on how well you structure things, and I mean you might want to jump through hoops and do it. But lenders don't allow purchasers to use money that comes out of the sky, out of the blue. So if you're applying for a mortgage, you say, well, I lived in this house, for 2 years, and now I want to buy it. And the lender says, how much do you have in the bank? And you say, well, I really don't have anything in the bank. But the landlord is going to give me $15,000 to buy this house.
Okay.
Well, that doesn't qualify as a gift, because a gift toward a mortgage has to come from a close family member and things like that. So unless that owner has set up an escrow account in your name and everything else like that, it's hard to do it that way. But what you would normally do is, when you write up the contract, you can give closing cost credits up to 6% of the sales price. But that money doesn't really go to down payment, covers all their other expenses and things like that.
Sure.
So if you're the person that's buying the option, if there is going to be a pool of money reserved for you, it should be held in a separate account, and you should look into structuring it that way, because certainly the owner of the property isn't going to care if the option period expires and you can't buy the house. You just thank you for all the extra rent money and things like that.
Right.
Does it make sense?
It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, based on what you're saying, is that mainly that money that's collected, regardless of what it's called, documented through, canceled checks and deposits in a landlord's bank account, can only be put towards the credits of the closing. So if it's $5,000 in closing cost expense, for example, title fees, whatever, things like that, attorney fees, that money goes back towards the credit. So they'd still have to come up with a separate down payment?
Yeah, unless that landlord has, basically opened up a bank account in your name.
Okay.
To say that this is your money.
But either way, I think it would be...
The person is saving money in it, but they don't go directly to the bank. They give me the check and I go to the bank for them.
Sure. I see what you're saying. That makes sense to me. Because then it becomes an account in their name, just like any other account. That makes sense. Okay.
Now, maybe it's helpful. I can give you a little scenario.
Sure.
Of a very good lease option that I had done. I actually years ago I used to recommend people that investors rent properties with lease options simply because you get higher rent. The people have intentions of buying your property, and oftentimes take better care of it because they have a vested interest. They think it's their home, and
they treat it like it's their house. Because in theory it will be.
Right, and in the likelihood of them actually being able to exercise that option, I'm going to say, and I really don't have any good hard statistics to prove it, is pretty low that they're going to come through it. But I had a house in Poplar Grove. It was a new construction house, and a family. The guy was a carpenter, and he actually made a lot of money because back then, the building business was just booming.
Sure.
And but they lived way beyond their means. So when you looked at their credit report, all their bills were always paid, but they owed tens of thousands of dollars on credit cards. They had 2 brand new cars, leases, over $500 a month each for the car. They just lived way, way, way beyond their means. So there was no way they were going to be able to get normal financing, and they wanted to live high on life. And there was this new house, and we entered into, I advertised it, rent to own. That really increases your call volume a lot, just putting that in there. And these people lived there, and they really did expect to buy that house someday. I got a call one time, can we put on a deck? And I said, well, I will let you do it. I'm not going to put on a deck for you. The house doesn't really need it. There's a patio sitting out there. No, we want a deck. And I said, well, then we'll draw up an agreement that you are, as a tenant, you are doing that for your own pleasure. And also, I want a lien waiver so you can never come back after me for the, that deck.
Great point.
Oh, it's to keep. Then they wanted to finish the basement, and they did a beautiful job of finishing the basement. They would like say a newer house, but after a couple of years, they wanted new carpeting, higher. These people put in all of this money on the house, and what happened after when the 3-year window was coming up? He got a much better job offer in Texas, and they had to move.
So instead of exercising the option and keeping the house, they decided they would just move.
You feel a little guilty. You get this. The house now. They really, really increased the value back. Just as a little gesture of appreciation, I gave them double their security deposit back. But they left me probably with $25,000 worth of improvements.
Wow.
And things happen. In no way during the 3 years of this option do they forecast that they were going to move. And I've had other clients do it the same way, that the people, they instead of just putting a house up for rent, they put it up with rent for option, increase the calls, explain to the people that we're going to start accumulating a little bit money toward the purchase. So average rents around here are $1,500, but I'm going to want $1,750 from you. They say that's fine. They think the house is going to be theirs, and yet during the option period, whether it's 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, whatever time frame you said, the day comes and they just do not have their act together to get financing. Or, like I say, there's other circumstances.
Well, that's what I wanted to. I think that was where I was going with my original question. Was a lot can happen in 3 years.
Yes, they can.
Babies happen.
Right.
Divorces happen.
Do they?
Marriages happen. Job changes happen. Deaths in the family happen. So that plan that was put into place 3 years earlier a lot of times can change, and it's not always at fault of the tenant, just because they haven't taken the necessary steps to improve upon their credit situation. It can be any number of circumstances, I think, that lead back to
Yes,
the failure of them not exercising the option, right?
And so, I mean, that's why the probability, the longer the option is. But again, extending out after 3 years gets into usury things and everything else.
Right.
But out 3 years, it's just you have to have a good justification for establishing your selling price. And if you're negotiating, if you're now the potential tenant because you're a real estate investor that has nothing, you better have some justification for the price you're setting for 3 years out. And of course, if you're the landlord, do some good projections.
So let's touch on that, because I understand what you're saying, but I'm going to guess there's some of the listeners that might have gotten a little confused when you said if you're the potential tenant as a real estate investor. Let's talk about why a lease option can be a viable way for an investor to obtain, it doesn't even have to be their first property, a property, or better said, control of a property, and what they can do in order to become an investor by utilizing a lease option type situation to their benefit as that front end tenant, if that makes sense.
It does, and it frustrates me with all of these people that keep coming to our meetings, which are free, not only free with an open bar, or we see these people, and we've had them come here. You put $30,000 on their credit card because they bought real estate classes from one of these real estate schools, and and all this time has passed. They've been coming here for years and years and years, and they have not gotten their first piece of real estate.
Sure.
All right. This is a way to get one, and oftentimes the rent-to-own properties are distressed properties. Mm-hmm. So you might have to take on agree to rent a house that might not be the fanciest place to live, but you're going to get it at a distressed price, and you could be the one that fixes it up and adds value, either to flip it or to rent it out, and then you go do another lease option again.
Well, and I think that
place.
what you just brought up, even the flip side. The flip opportunity from lease option wasn't even something that I was even thinking about, but now that you bring that up, yeah, what a great way to find a property that may or may not be in the greatest of condition and potentially undervalued, because you've got an investor, landlord, or, well, they're all landlords, but maybe just a regular person that utilizes the rent to own or the lease option marketing tool in order to find a tenant. You can set a price in advance, and I mean, let's run through regular numbers here, like we started to earlier. You set a lease option, let's say a purchase price on that option of $100,000, and you're paying, $1,000 a month to the rent to that individual who is currently your landlord, but now you have control of this house, and you know that if you do XYZ worth of improvements to that property, right? Maybe update a bathroom, put a roof on it, whatever that is, because it's just like any purchase, you have to evaluate that property before you actually sign on the dotted line. But maybe it's going to be worth $135,000 after putting $10,000 worth of work into it, and you've locked a price in at $100,000. So you could hypothetically use that with, essentially as a flip without having to get your own financing to handle the acquisition, right? I mean, that's what I'm hearing on the flip. That's a great idea.
Let me come up with two scenarios here. One, I enjoyed your last podcast where you were talking about that property that you picked up because you thought it was a good deal out in Lindenhurst.
Right.
But you were also looking for some potential buyers for that house where you'd make a little bit of money, and there's still substantial room for a buyer to make money as a flip.
Absolutely.
And the reason that was a house you picked up that was a little outside of the proximity where you like to keep your investments.
That's correct.
So here's a property that would be just the ideal candidate for a lease option. because you said the property needs a little bit of work. It's habitable and everything else
Yes.
like that.
Correct.
So one of you investors out there with no money, no time, no job, no income, no energy, no ambition, that want to become a millionaire, here's like the perfect place for you to go out there, do a lease option with Joe, negotiate something 2 years, work on the house. Fix it up, and then you will be enhancing the value of the house, so you can exercise the option and sell it and put some money in your bank account, or you've enhanced the value, and now when you go get a mortgage, if you finally got your act together to be able to get a mortgage, it's going to be, you will actually have equity in the house just because of the difference between what you paid and what the house is now worth. So for you as an investor, to me, lease option would be something you might want to consider, since this isn't a house that you wouldn't be disappointed having it in your portfolio, but you wouldn't feel the loss of anything if it wasn't in your portfolio.
Me, you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Median.
you could be getting, and a lot of time, like again with the lease option, you might want to have somebody give you $5,000 up front to pay for the option, but really the person coming along might not have any money, so
Sure.
you're just going to charge them $300 a month more than probably the average rent. And it doesn't mean you have to give them that $300 back. It's whatever you could negotiate with them. That you're giving them $100 back. It's because they don't have many other opportunities to go somewhere else, and for your extra $300 a month, there's nothing they can get into where they could get potential ownership. So they're just buying that potential ownership. So there's a house. Now, I to prepare for this podcast, I was kind of going through one of Trulia's old blogs, and there was actually a realtor that was owned a really nice home, low mortgage payment, and thought he could get significant rent for his house, but all of his money was in that house. Except for like 20, 30,000. I don't know what the amount was. So he went out and found a really nice property that had or not so nice property, but in an area that he liked, and he had two choices. Either I could try and buy that house and use my money as a down payment, and then I have no money left.
Right.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to take my money and I'm going to fix up that house. So he put in kitchens and stuff like that. Did the lease option. So when the lease option came up, he raised the value of the house so significantly, it was easy for him to get, 70% loan to value financing.
So he did a refi.
So there's somebody with, good assets, good income, and used the lease option to do it. Now, give you kind of an example where an investor, if you have a distressed property that's really hard to sell, lease option may be the thing to consider. One thing I want to point out, and I want to make sure everybody is listening to this though, if you are a owner that is entering into a lease option, that option now does prevent you from doing anything else during that option period with that house, like selling it to somebody else. Now, for you potential tenants, there's a plus for you, because oftentimes you could sell that option. So if you structure it right, and you bought like in some neighborhood in Chicago that just decided to take a great turn for the better, and all of a sudden you're never going to be able to get a mortgage, but this house that you agreed to buy for $350,000 is now worth $500,000. You could sell that option.
Sure. That makes sense. I forgot about that too.
No, and
Great point.
And this is no different than the way it works, like with commodities options,
Sure.
stock.
Right. So as an investor, I can get control of a property by getting into a lease option agreement on whatever the term is. We'll call it 3 years, just because we keep mentioning that number.
Mm-hmm.
And not only can I exercise that option and close on it after I fix it up, or maybe I don't even do that. Maybe I lease option it out to someone else and become the landlord now, recoup my option cost that I paid up front of, let's say, $5,000, and have an actual tenant or another tenant buyer.
Well, you
you're
still
in the middle.
have to conform to the terms of the lease while it's a lease. So
No, I understand.
if there's no subleasing or anything
Right.
like that.
So you'd want to make sure if you were an investor trying to control a property through lease option, that you'd be allowed to sublet that property. Otherwise, technically, you'd be in violation of the lease agreement you have with that owner if you rented it out to someone else and collected your own option payment. But what you're suggesting is just taking that option outright and just selling it out, just selling it off to an end buyer.
It's wholesaling at its best. I have the right to buy this house for $350,000 at this time. You want to give me, $25,000?
Right.
I will give you that right.
I know. Perfect. No, that's actually a very clean and easy to understand way to explain it. I have the option to buy it for $350,000. I know it's worth $450,000 or whatever that number is. If you want to give me $25,000, I will give you that option, which is also the right to buy this house at this price of $350,000. That's a great way to put it. No, I like it. I'm glad we covered that. One of the other things I wanted to add too is, well, hold on, let's go backwards. I hate to go this far back because it's been a little bit since you brought it up, but what's the difference between a lease option and a lease purchase? Just dive into lease purchase a little bit more, because you touched on it, but
basically a lease purchase is a purchase contract with a closing that's deferred for years.
So like we sign an actual real estate contract for
I'm going to
$350,000, and you set the closing date 3 years away.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
That I agreed to purchase this house on October 20th, 2021.
Okay.
Anything between now and then, yes, I'm on a lease.
Okay.
But when October 20th, 2021 comes up and you don't buy that house, you are in default.
Okay.
Of the contract.
Okay. No, that explains the difference. I don't know, which one do you think, I mean, for the purposes of relating to investors, what do you think is more beneficial for someone to look at?
For the people that come here with, nothing. It depends.
Limited funds and limited resources, we'll call it. Sometimes.
Yeah, and you think you can get your act together, then it's pretty much the same, whether you're going to exercise an option or you've agreed to buy it. But the reason the option is better is if you are in bad circumstances, or your life changed, or you moved, or relocated, or whatever. With the option, you can walk away with the purchase. So I would never advise doing the purchase
Lease
if
purchase.
I were the person doing the purchasing. But sometime if I were the owner of the property and I really wanted to get rid of the thing, and for whatever reasons, I want to tie the guy up to a commitment.
Right.
So a lease purchase might be stronger, but a lease purchase will scare people away, where lease option attracts them in droves.
And it offers a lot more flexibility,
Yes,
I think,
it
is
does.
basically what you're saying.
Now,
for both parties.
Yes. Again, this podcast is about the pros and cons to the person acquiring the property, and also the pros and cons for the person that owns the property. I want to caution anybody that's entering into one of these agreements. You have to make sure that if you're entering into a lease option, that the owner of the property is a legitimate owner with legitimate,
Great point.
hopefully, equity, is paying his mortgage on time, and has a clear title, and doesn't have a bunch of IRS liens or anything else up against the property. So
Right.
it's definitely a good idea to do a title search and to have some way of proving that the owner is making mortgage payments, and again, check that title.
Right. So for those of you who might not have as much experience with this stuff, you can contact a title company once you've got any type of, probably even without an agreement, but I would know for sure once you've got some type of an agreement with an owner. If you're a tenant, whatever the situation is, and they will run a preliminary title report for you that's going to at least identify potential red flags that you'd want to stay away from.
Yes,
typically that's somewhere, very low end, $50, $150, depending on who you're using. And I know we've done that as well, or I've done that as well for properties that I'm looking at purchasing. Even before we get into a contract, I've done some research on stuff up front, mainly for the foreclosure auction, sheriff sale type stuff, but it could be utilized in any situation. I want to offer a couple more points here, just because I know these are great little aspects that I think we need to bring up. Is you did say a hard to sell property.
Yes.
So if you're a landlord or even just a regular homeowner that has a difficult property to sell because you back up to the train tracks and the coal mine runs 24/7 or whatever the situation is,
you can't afford it anymore.
This lease option rent to own type platform, it creates a lot more buzz about a property when a tenant who's aspiring to own something someday can get into it for a very low upfront investment of their own and potentially quote unquote become the homeowner. So great way to sell a property in addition to, or I'm sorry, I said that backwards. It's a great way to also rent out a property if you're an investor that may be faced with that same situation, and all the feedback from your potential tenants is, hey, I don't like the fact that the train tracks are right there and they run 24/7. Try offering it as a rent-to-own or a lease option, because you're going to find some more tenants that become a lot more interested than just your regular tenant base that are used to being lifelong renters and just plan on paying a rent and everything done for them.
And there's the high probability you'll be getting premium rent, and
you
they won't exercise the option.
Right, that does happen. Correct. I mean, most of the time, I would say if anybody has any opposing thoughts on this, I'd love to hear them. But from everyone I've talked to about lease options, again, with my very limited experience in them personally, it sounds like even though all parties might have everyone's best interest at heart, in the end, after the 3-year term or the 2-year term, whatever it is, it's highly probable that they're not going to exercise that option. Mm-hmm. Not that you intend on, marketing the property that way, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, as they say. Mm-hmm. I wanted to jump back to allowing the listeners to take a look back at the podcast. Episode number 26 was a live recording session at the IMN conference in Miami, I believe, or Arizona. I don't remember off the top of my head. Where I was actually on a panel that discussed lease options, seller financing, and land contracts. That's the Investor Empowerment Radio Show number 26. And the reason why I bring that up is because one of the panelists, their entire business model was to purchase distressed properties in any type of condition and lease them all out via a lease option / rent-to-own type strategy. That's all they did. I believe I'd have to listen to the podcast again, but I'm fairly certain they had somewhere between 300 or 500 houses, all in the Midwest. The entire model, purchasing them for 50 cents, 75 cents on the dollar, not necessarily doing any work to them, and I'm going to get to why I said not necessarily, and running them out on a lease option. Because a lot of times when, as Doug brought up earlier with his own personal example, these tenants want to be homeowners, and they're going to want to improve that property how they see fit, whether they want to paint the walls pink or yellow or purple. It's what they see because they believe that to be their future residence, and they're gonna fix up that house potentially to your benefit if they don't exercise that option. And one thing that came out of that podcast on that panel that I distinctly remember was there was a question from the audience of what if the roof goes bad, what if a tree collapses on the house, what if the furnace fails? These higher end expenses where historically, you're going to hear investors talk about how lease options are a great way to make the tenant fix everything and you not pay for it. What this company offered, and they're, like I said, large scale company with several hundred rentals, stated is that they actually don't necessarily put all those costs on the tenant. So there's they either put a cap on it of, let's say, you cover all repairs and expenses, related to the property up to a certain dollar amount. And again, I haven't listened to that podcast in a while, so let's call it $3,000. Or if there's a catastrophic problem with the house, they're going to maintain an insurance policy if a tree falls on it, regardless if the tenant has one or not. And they're going to work together to make sure that those repairs are made or that furnace gets replaced, because it's in everyone's best interest to keep the home occupied and the tenant paying and, a habitable situation, because that's really what it's all about. And I think having that type of ethical attitude is what can help people succeed if you want to get into that lease option business. I wouldn't say every single repair is going to be on that tenant, because it's really going to depend what it is. So that's something you might need to figure out in advance.
Well, yeah, and actually, most of the time, you'll just treat it as a tenant, as a normal lease. If something needs to be repaired during the time, because again, these people don't have to exercise the option. You're still the landlord.
Right. You're still ultimately responsible.
Right.
I guess that's what I was getting.
But that's not the point. But people generally will probably be less abusive to the house as tenants are.
Take better care of it.
But this is not. I'm glad you brought that up. There are large companies that have been doing this for a long time.
Yep.
This is because what happens is even if you've got an investment that you like and the person does decide to exercise their option, you're going to get a good price for that house. You've gotten premium rent, so you just take that money and go buy yourself another investment.
Sure.
And you keep the momentum going that way.
Well, you take this strategy and you multiply it times 10, and you've got a viable, thriving rental business. And
you're helping people get into the housing market, and that's really what I'm trying to do here for the people that have been coming here for years and years and years with some formula. I've been looking for this formula for years, and I never found anything. If you bought a property 3 years ago, you'd be sitting much prettier now than since all these years you've done nothing.
Correct. One podcast, we actually interviewed someone else that worked only on, I think he's flipped as well. He did some fix and flipping as well. But Bill Powers was on the Investor Empowerment Series radio show, episode number 28. His main business model is actually a rent-to-own type strategy as well. And as Doug and I have been discussing, one thing I really liked about that podcast and about Bill in himself is that it was their goal to find a tenant buyer that was actually going to execute and close on the house.
Yes.
And I believe he said about 66 or 2/3 of the time they actually did exercise and close, which is what the goal was. So it just has to be built into your business model properly. So when you do have 10 properties and 6 of them exercise their option in year 3, you're prepared for that if you plan on having this be like the staple business that supplies, food on the table for your family. Which, not to mention, you just sold 6 houses, so hopefully you're making some money on that in itself. And one other thing to bring up about this is, would you say, Doug, it's a good idea to have, in order to create the best situation for a tenant, let's say that's got a low credit score in the 500s, whether it be an investor buyer tenant or a regular tenant that wants to be a homeowner, would you get a loan officer involved on the front end? So tell me what you think about the loan officer side of it.
A lot of the loan officers that we work with, and there's some good loan officers out there that will evaluate your situation at this time, and they will tell you what you need to do to get your finances in order to acquire a property and how long it will take you to do that, and you can structure the option around that. So if you have high debt to income, how long is it going to take you to pay down this debt? If you have collections to clear up, if whatever your circumstances are, if you're anticipating that you'll be making more money next year for whatever reason, you're in line for a promotion or something like that, where your income will rise, and whatever your situation is, yes, a loan officer will walk you through that and start the credit reparation process and everything that goes along with it. So like you say, we're talking about 2 groups here. We're trying to help investors use this as a vehicle to help their investment strategy, and we're also trying to help people that are trying to acquire investments. So both sides here. And the side for trying to acquire, there's some reason you cannot buy a piece of real estate. Yes, a loan officer will walk you through the process, and then you will have some of the information you need on how you would like to structure the lease, the option.
And one quick plug for our newest sponsor, Priority One Mortgage, out of the Chicagoland area here. I was actually talking to the owner of the company this morning, and he sent me some information on an actual program that they have through Priority One Mortgage that is a lease option / lease purchase designed loan. So it helps that tenant structure their option agreement and their lease in order to receive the best benefit and actually truly close that loan at the end of that 3-year term. And just real quickly, I'm looking at some of the information he sent me. They can do up to 90% loan to value. They can base it off the appraised value at the time of purchase, the actual the loan amount, the LTV amount. The tenant themselves needs to save copies of the canceled rent checks just to prove that those rent payments were made, and it has to be in existence. The agreement has to be at least 12 months old in order for them to be able to actually offer a specific mortgage to a lease option or lease purchase type situation. So I just wanted to bring that up real quick. Again, Priority One Mortgage is our new sponsor to the radio show, and you can reach them at 847-717-9005 or visit them on the old interweb at www.p1mc.com.
And I look forward to connecting with them.
Absolutely. No, I think I'm going to try to get Gary on the show here pretty quickly, but I've been talking about some of the options they offer as well. So one last thing I kind of wanted to ask, and this is a question for my own knowledge, and I'm sure something that's going to pop up in everyone's head as they listen to this. What's the difference between, and I don't know this answer, is there a difference between a down payment and a security deposit? That you know of. So you have a security deposit. Is that separate of the down payment?
There is a huge difference. First of all, anytime you're taking a lease, you get a security deposit,
right?
And that is money to be refunded
if
there was no damage, or money to be used to cover tenant damage.
Sure.
And this is a great question, because depending on where you invest, security deposits are so regulated in the city of Chicago.
Sure.
Landlords don't even want to take them anymore.
Really?
Because you have to provide the tenant with actually a book on their rights and everything, and how to collect it back. And they can sue the landlord if the interest rate, because they have to pay interest on this, is right off by a little bit. So yes. If you call something a security deposit, especially in Chicago, you are up for all kinds of liability.
But in theory, as an investor myself,
is suppose amount. Finish. You're saying, here's $5,000 to pay for the option.
Right.
That's non-refundable.
That's what I'm suggesting. So let's make sure that anybody who decides to employ this strategy not only possibly consults with their legal team, but they also consider not either collect a down payment and a security deposit that might be held separately, or don't even worry about the security deposit, as you're going to be collecting a larger non-refundable fee up front.
Well, first of all, if you're the landlord or the owner of the property, get a security deposit. I mean, so you're protected if the
separate of the down payment, separate of the option payment.
But it's separate, yeah. But an option is non-refundable. The person is buying that up. Just like today, if I went to Charles Schwab and bought some options. Well, I'm paying for those options.
And
if I don't do anything with them, it's gone.
All right. Well, first of all, let me say thanks again for being on the show, Doug. We got to wrap this up.
Okay.
Awesome show again. Lots of great information. A lot more questions kind of floating around in my head, so we might need to extend this into even a part 2 in the near future here.
I would love to do that.
That would be awesome. So thank you. Last question is, and this is, I want to hear your opinion on this based on your many decades of experience, your lifetimes of experience. I'm a landlord who doesn't want to sell properties. That's me. That's Joe Mueller. I want to keep them unless, like, I'm selling one of my rentals right now that I had located in an area that I bought over 10 years ago for a very low price, and to me it became time because it needed a roof, it needed some other things. I don't have my team in place down in that area anymore. I'm like, you know what? I just want to get rid of this thing at this point. That said, I want to hold on to my properties. I want to keep building a portfolio. Can I buy the option back from the tenant?
Well, the answer is simple. If you write that in the agreement.
In the option agreement.
Again, this is all negotiable. It's like any contract. Put it together any way you want. You might, agree to the option price was, just less $5,000.
$5,000.
Might agree to buy it back at $10,000 at any time.
Okay.
Upon notice.
I would say more like $5,500.
Well, no, I so but you might need an incentive for that the owner of the option to really want to give it back to you.
But if I really love
it, again, they are controlling your property.
Right. No, I agree. I just was wondering what your thought on was that. So yes, you can buy the option back. Most people are probably shaking their head at me right now like, well, why would you want to do that anyway? My thought would be because, if you've got 20, 30, 40, 50 properties all on lease options, you might need to take a close look at your portfolio and re-strategize if you've got options about to execute.
Can I just give you a quick example?
Please.
I like Ogle County. There's so many things going on.
What's Ogle County?
Rochelle.
You mean Illinois?
Junction, yes.
Okay, Ogle County, Illinois.
There's lots of subtle things going on out there. Growth. They're building Amtrak railroad cars and everything else like this. All these agriculture. But the biggest one is that Toyota is really considering building a major auto manufacturing plant in Rochelle. Now, there's a bunch of reasons people don't want to come to Illinois, but that area is so heavy, intense on rail and highways and land and everything else. Good schools, low property taxes. That's why I take people there.
I love that.
Okay, but anyway, here's the thing. So you might want to have that option written in there, because if Toyota, you've got, let's say you have property in Ogle County,
right?
But if Toyota says they're going to build, you might want to keep that property.
Right, sure.
Because, Toyota is going to shoot up rents because it's going to be, that's why I would be out in Boone County a lot. I made a lot of money out there years ago when Chrysler, they have their big production facility in Belvedere, but it was a small production facility until they decided to go from one shift in a small plant to round the clock 3 shifts and expand the plant. Well, having rental property in Boone County was like the best thing ever when Chrysler was bringing in people from all over the country,
nice.
Thousands of people. So that's just an example of why you've got a property in Ogle County. You don't know when Toyota's going to take another year to make that decision. But boy, if Toyota says, yeah, I'm going to do it, then you say, I think I'm going to buy that option back and keep this house.
Yeah,
because it's going to jump.
That's kind of what I'm getting at.
The value is going to jump.
Well, as you said, for the life of a tenant, or what goes on in the life of a tenant over a 3-year period can change dramatically. Well, lots of other things can change dramatically as well. So, thanks for bringing that point up, or thanks for answering that question for me. Again, thanks to the listeners for being members and listeners to our podcast here, the Investor Empowerment Series Radio Show. This is episode number 64. Special thanks to Doug for offering his insight and educational aspects to lease options and lease purchases today.
Oh, glad to do it. And I hope that the people that keep coming here and saying they want to get real estate, listen to us and get something. And here's a good way to do it.
Go buy some houses. All right, people. Thank you for your time. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Investor Empowerment Series Radio Show. Be sure to tune in next week for another empowering episode. We welcome your feedback, so please rate us on iTunes and Stitcher, and visit us at www.investorempowermentchicago.com or tannisgrouprealty.com.